Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.14 tier list. Once again, I'm Dan Harrison, and just a reminder that recently we had some big changes to our tier list. We added an extra tier to better spread out the champions in our list, and we've updated the tier list page on our site. The tier list videos didn't change too much as we still only focus on champs from S, A and B, but you can head on over to mobalytics.gg to see the full list including C and D tiers. They're featured in the table at the bottom of the page. Now let's jump straight in. So, taking a look at top lane, in the God tier we have Wukong and Nasus, and in the S tier we have Camille, Dr. Mundo, Fiora, Garen, Jax, Kled, Malphite, Ornn, Zed, Shen, Urgot and Yorick. We've seen the items from last patch start to settle in. Hullbreaker has been a decent option that helps enable side laning, but it hasn't really fixed the problem with split pushing, which is that you're forced to fight for Drakes and Barons and can't consistently apply enough pressure to mitigate this. Anathema's is strong in niche scenarios, but isn't a must take for everyone. Definitely can make a tough lane bearable if you can buy it early however, but mostly we've seen it on supports. In terms of changes for this patch, a big one is a nerf to Nocturne's passive effect on minions. And then we also saw Nocturne have Stridebreaker nerf, which meant he's not going to be hitting the same highs as he was in 11.13. He still moved up in the list as he made a massive surge upwards with the Stridebreaker changes, but initially we'd planned to move him to God tier, whereas with the change, he's going to remain in A. We saw some compensation buffs for Darius and Garen. They've been struggling without the extra dash from Stridebreaker. Neither buff is really significant, but Garen was already in a good spot while Darius is really struggling at lower ranks. Relia has had a pretty major rework. It's a little bit tough to place her and she does tend to struggle at lower ranks, but we've tentatively put her in B tier as from the sounds of it the changes make her easier and more accessible for the wider player base, so assuming the power levels come in at where Riot has aimed them, then she should be an okay pick in the top lane. First up for our highlight picks is Wukong, and he's a great pick in the top lane. He can challenge most matchups from level 1, being able to trade heavily with his E, and when he gets to level 6, his ult gives him strong all-in potential. His W makes him super safe and hard to punish, so as long as you're somewhat respectful, you can play aggro on lane and harass your opponent. Some players have even been taking Ignite instead of Flash to cement that lane advantage. When it comes to teamfights, you're super disruptive and can cause chaos with your ultimate while doing enough damage to take down key targets. With Divine Sundra, you spike on one item and remain relevant from there onwards. Ornn is in a pretty decent spot at the moment. With a few changes to tank atomization, he's holding up well and still capable of huge CC engages and doing good damage. Anathema's is actually a really solid pickup for him as it limits the effectiveness of split pushers while also giving him a ton of durability in team fights if he opts to use it on the enemy AD carry or their only AP threat. Remember, it also increases CC duration on the target, so your CC combo just got more unbearable and you're able to keep a high priority target locked up for longer. Abyssal Mass serves well as an item to help increase your team's damage and guarantee any target hit by your ult is going to go down. And a final nice change you had with the introduction of mythic items is Ornn will always be able to upgrade his allies' items. Last season, you have to hope your allies built a specific item that could be upgraded, things like Rabadon's or Infinity Edge, and if they hadn't finished it, you had to wait. Now that everyone builds a mythic and most players complete it early, you'll always have good options to choose from for your upgrades. Mundo has started to find a lot of success in the top lane at lower ranks. We did see some changes that toned down his passive sustain to increase his jungle power, but he's still looking to be a strong option at lower ranks. It's important to keep your range in lane. Between your Q and E you can harass opponents while keeping a safe distance from them, and then when they're chunked out and you're winning in sustain you can push in to capitalize. Mundo scales really well, outputting a ton of damage while being incredibly bulky, and the fact he now gets a flat heal when he presses R makes him a lot less vulnerable to being bursted before his healing kicks in. Next up is Jungle. In the God tier we have Xin Zhao, Shaco and Nocturne, and the S tier we have Amumu, Diana, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Rammus, Trundle, Volibear, Warwick and Zac. Xin Zhao took a nerf to his W cooldown to reel him in a bit, but he's still incredibly strong at skirmishing and dominating solo queue games. Definitely a hit to his power, but not enough to derail him. Graves received a minor buff to his AD, which actually makes a pretty big difference considering how much he autos, not enough for a significant increase in his power, but he definitely deserves a small bump up. We did see nerfs to Shaco's HP and movement speed, but he's still a solo queue terror and won't really be affected much by this. First up for our highlight picks is Fiddlesticks, and he's a great solo queue pick as teams often disrespect him. His control of the map is so good with his effigies and the enemy team constantly has to play respectful as Crowstorm is a great 1v9 ability. Nocturne solo lane is actually a great combo with Fiddle, not just as a dive buddy but because the darkness from his ultimate resets Fiddle's passive as the enemy team can't see him, so you're guaranteed to get that big AoE fear that'll win you a team fight. Fiddle can struggle if targeted early by multiple champions, as getting your drain interrupted can hurt, but he's an alright duelist if he gets to jump on his opponent, and his sustain makes his clear pretty healthy. Zac is the king of engages and in a good spot right now. He has great itemization choices with things like Abyssal Mask allowing him to solo squishy targets, and his engage is really threatening and hard to play around. The early clear can be a little dangerous, but once you get to level 5 you can start looking for ganks, and immobile champions really struggle to play safe when you're on the enemy team. In teamfights you're capable of causing so much disruption and chaos, and if your team has follow-up damage you can decimate the backline easily. Diana has been a bit of a signature pick and pro play at the moment, and she's doing work in solo queue at lower ranks as well. Clear is pretty fast thanks to your passive, and although your ganks aren't the best early, once you hit 6 you can have a huge impact. Your ult is super powerful for 1v9 in games, and if you catch multiple enemies, you can instantly win a fight. Ideally you want to be paired with a team which has a bunch of CC, as it can keep the opponents trapped in your ultimate to guarantee the damage connects. Set is a really popular one for this, so if you're planning to duo with a friend, it's a great option. Onto the mid lane. In the God tier we have Lux and Annie, and in the S tier we have Ahri, Anivia, Diana, Katarina, Malzahar, Sylas, Yasuo, Yone and Ziggs. Mid lane hasn't changed too much. The AP items coming in definitely help the stronger mages, but hasn't really introduced too many picks in the lane, just helped out those that were already established. There is a nerf to Malzahar that has dropped him from God tier, but he's still solid and performing well with the cheaper mythics. Rumble is falling off in favour, the nerf to his scrap shield cooldown didn't help him out, and the cheaper mage mythics have made the lane more competitive. Xerath is a pick who seemed like he was on the rise with the mage mythic changes, but has struggled in the current skirmish heavy meta and so has dropped down to A tier. Sylas is a solid pick in the right hands. His laning is okay, although he can be harassed by some trickier champs in the laning phase, but he does scale really well. His healing is insane with his W, and he can find a ton of value in skirmishes if he survives long enough to use it repeatedly. Sylas' strength often depends on what ults he can steal, so it's always worth picking him later in the draft so you can look at what options you have. Certain ults like Swain's and Alistair's give you a lot of survivability, while others like Malphite or Amumu will give you a ton of damage in CC. Viego is pretty broken right now. Currently his favoured build is taking Divine Sundra for a bit less sustained damage than Kraken Slayer, but a lot of survivability and healing. In skirmishes and teamfights you're a really solid pick, and if your team can set you up to get a reset, you get so much value with the healing and extra ult usage. Avoid diving in first with Viego, as you can get focused down before you get a chance to ultimate, and try and balance your passive usage and sustain to buy more and more time and win out in extended fights. Your early laning isn't the strongest, so there will be some trickier matchups, but once you hit 6 you can start to take over the game. Annie is a great low elo staple pick. She's consistent, easy to play, and delivers really well at lower ranks. Farming with your Q is easy and refunds mana, so it allows you to build up CS. Once you hit 6 or even before that with the right setup in jungle, you can look to find aggressive plays with your stun, and this becomes even more powerful with your ultimate. In teamfights, finding a good angle to flank and getting on the backline can result in you insta-killing your opponent, but sometimes you have enough damage in CC that you can just shred through their front line with assistance from your team. Annie's weakness is that she's a bit low range, but with flash you can overcome that by forcing engages. On to AD carries, in the God tier we have Ezreal, Ziggs and Kog'Maw. In the S tier we have Ashe, Jhin, Misfortune, Sivir, Swain and Vayne. AD carry has mostly gone untouched this patch. There hasn't been any changes focused towards them, and the biggest thing is Ziggs got a 60 base mana nerf, which will hit his early laning a little bit, but isn't too much of a problem, and he's a monster at the moment, so he's still deserving of his spot. Onto highlight picks, first up is Jhin. He's in a really solid position, he's good at finding lane priority, and he syncs really well with the range of supports, whether they're looking to engage and need his burst or to harass together. A big factor in Jin's power is Gale Force giving him a dash, which helps him remain far safer than he used to be. You can set up plays with your W or R and look to use Gale Force with 4th shot to take out critical targets. Jhin scales really well, so when you hit the later stages and can throw out huge crit autos and get rewarded with a ton of movement speed, you become a very hard target to deal with. Draven is a difficult champion to play, and not something I'd recommend to everyone, but his recent buffs made a pretty big impact and he's been stomping games at every elo. If you're comfortable with Draven, then now is a solid time to start playing him again and looking to snowball games. Be warned, there will be a huge target on your head thanks to your Cassian passive, and you'll often see junglers heavily focus you to try to shut you down, and for good reason. If left alone, you'll bully opponents, and if you land a kill, you'll skyrocket ahead in terms of gold and become a massive problem for the enemy team. Finally, on to support. In the God tier we have Zyra, Zillion and Leona, and the S tier we have Brand, Janna, Lulu, Nami, Senna, Sonos, Rocket and Xerath. Support had a few tweaks. Karma got a base AD nerf mostly to hit her viability as a flex and competitive. Her win rate was already a bit weak, and this definitely doesn't help her trading, so she's dropped to C tier. Seraphine had a Q damage and AP ratio buffed, but this mostly affects lane Seraphine rather than support, so she hasn't shifted. Tahm Kench got some big buffs this patch as he was really struggling post rework, and it's hard to scope out where he will land, but he should be substantially better than his current dire state. Carrick got some buffs to his mana cost on this patch, and this actually makes a big difference. Carrick can spam spells with his passive, but it's often gated by his mana, and so any help to that really allows him to get a lot more value. In the laning phase, he can sync well with an AD carry who can set up his stun easily. Kalista is a solid example, but Tristana works too. In the later stages, it becomes a massive problem as his ult can be a teamfight winner if used correctly. Carrick is best when his team has a lot of engages. Things like Nocturne, he can throw his E and ult on top of to help make the dive even more threatening and stop the enemy team from just running away as soon as you press your R. Pyke has made a bit of a resurgence thanks to a new Stridebreaker build. It helps you line up your stuns and ults a lot more effectively and is great as a pick tool. Pyke already has a lot of mobility, so it's easy for him to get in range to set up Stridebreaker, and the 90% slow is very problematic for any enemies. With this item, you can play for picks until it comes to teamfights where you can look to carry with resets from your ultimate. It's key that you don't overcommit too hard with Pyke at the start of the fight, as your squishing can be bursted down. Often waiting for a window to start getting resets is ideal and can give your team the momentum to find the win. I'm not a big fan of this champion, but she is doing pretty well at the moment and it's worth mentioning. Yuumi. She's not the highest impact champion early, but with so many strong bruisers running around, you have great options to latch onto and give a ton of value. Things like Nocturne, Jin Zhao, Gwen, Viego all become super hard to kill monsters when paired with a Yuumi. Laning phase can be dangerous, especially when playing into the big engaged champions like Leona and Nautilus, but if you have a safer lane or an AD carry who can function well at a distance, then you scale incredibly well and become a pest later on. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo lists in one place, including C&D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. Everything has just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time and thanks for watching.